Okay, so welcome everybody to Community, to the Young Dementia Network Tea Time webinar, Community. It's focusing on the importance of support and connection for family members, carers of people with young onset. And we've got the lovely Tide panellists with us today. I'm going to hand over shortly, but just before I do, you can't be seen and heard if you're an attendee, but the panelists will be visible and are on mic for the period of the hour. But what we wanted to do was to make sure that we really encourage you as attendees to use the chat function. There's generally a very lively chat flow going on, and also the Q&A, because we'll be leaving time at the toward the end for questions from you as the attendees. So thank you very much for coming on this rather warm day, and I hope you'll really thoroughly enjoy the next hour. Over to Sarah.
Thanks ever so much, Tessa. So my name's Sarah Merriman, and I'm the head of delivery for TIDE, which stands for Together in Dementia Every Day. I'll just speak to you a little bit more about what we do in a second, but I'll just let my my co-panelists introduce themselves. So Christine.
I'm Christine Wise. I'm carer for my husband, who has young onset dementia and have been for 9 years. He was finally diagnosed at 58.
Thanks, Christine. Sharon?
Hello, I'm Sharon Newby. I'm a carer for my partner, who is now 63 and has a diagnosis of cerebral amyloid angiopathy and Alzheimer's disease.
Thanks, Sharon. And Janice?
Hi, I'm Janice, and I'm a member of Tide Carers. I've also been a member of their advisory group for the last 3 years, and I've made lots of friends and contacts through Tide Carers. I looked after Richard, my husband, who had young onset Alzheimer's.
Thanks, Janice. Thank you. So welcome everybody, and we'll go on with the discussion in a couple of minutes. First of all, for anybody that's watching today that sort of says, I've never heard of Tide, who are you? You know, what do you do? I'll just very, very briefly show you a couple of introduction slides. It'll only take a couple of minutes. So who are we at Tide? Well, Tide stands for Together in Dementia Every Day, and we are a UK-wide network connecting carers and former carers of people with dementia to create real change at local and national levels. Also, we're a registered charity. At Tide, we try and empower carers by recognising them as experts by experience. We help equip them with tools and confidence to apply their knowledge and experience in a purposeful way so that other carers can benefit from their strength, enable their voice to be heard and influence real change. Our vision at Tide is a world where carers of people with dementia use their voices and society reflects and responds to their unique needs. So the benefits of joining Tide, what does it offer members? Well, most importantly probably, and what we're going to talk about today, it offers connection with other carers who have similar experience and provides that vital peer support. It also provides a feeling of belonging and reducing feelings of isolation and loneliness. We have a variety of activities and events to take part in, and we also offer opportunities for members to tell their story and have their voices heard, raising awareness about key issues and influencing change. We also enable care members to gain new skills or rediscover lost skills. And just finally, because we do so much at Tide, this is just a little tube map, basically, of all the different kinds of areas we're involved in and our carers are involved in. Everything from raising awareness, campaigning, to training and development, to social media, newsletters, people telling their stories, workshop sessions, presentations, all kinds of things. So there's an awful lot there to look at on our website. the details are there. You can actually find an introduction to Tide session that you can watch at your leisure if you want to, just to see a bit more about what we do, because I don't want to take too much time up today, you know, talking about that. But yeah, do have a look at our website, and if you've got any questions, feel free to email us. So I will stop sharing now. That was a whistle-stop tour of Tide. So today then, firstly, we're going to talk about basically start at the beginning and just talk briefly through the stage of diagnosis, and have a chat around that. So for some people who might be watching, you know, their partner might be at the very, very early stages of dementia, or their loved one maybe. And I just thought it'd be useful for everyone to, you know, just to give a little bit of background as to what happened. So Janice, do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's fine. And that's actually where I plan to start my chat with you. The first sign of anything being wrong with my husband was losing his job. He was unfairly dismissed, and I had to deal with his employers over a court case, as my husband was so stressed about it, he couldn't cope with it. Fortunately, we won. During this time, I was changing some furniture around, and I asked my husband to plug in the Hoover for me. He promptly pulled an armchair across the room, and I thought, what on earth is going on here? There were one or two more instances like that. So I took him to our GP, who said he was suffering from depression, but I wasn't convinced it was depression. After adjusting his antidepressants a couple of times to no avail, I said it obviously wasn't depression. And at that point, the GP said my husband was suffering from PTSD. I disagreed and asked if it could be young onset dementia. I was told no, he was too young for that. He gave my husband more drugs and sent us away. I again researched his symptoms, and all of them pointed to a form of dementia, although I wasn't sure what it was. After a further adjustment of his drugs, there was still no improvement. So then I said I wasn't leaving the GP's surgery until he referred us for testing. That took another 7 months. At the consultant's appointment, she showed us the brain scan, and you could already see damage to the brain. It had taken us 3 years to get to that point. As I'd researched young onset, I'd found out about Admiral nurses, so I asked for a referral from my GP. After 4 months, we were lucky enough to be referred to an Admiral nurse who was my saviour. He was only with us for a year, but in that time, he taught me so much. As my husband was only 57, he was too young to retire, so I carried on working full time. And my older brother had said he would look after Richard during the day if necessary. So I was working full time, travelling 10 hours a week and caring for Richard for 55 hours a week. I had no financial help at that time and was paying my brother £1,000 a month from my salary. After 12 months, the Admiral nurse referred us to the local disabled association for an assessment. They managed to get my husband disabled living allowance and also referred us to the local authority, who eventually took over the payments to my brother, with some relief on my part. During the first year with the Admiral nurse, I joined Uniting Carers, which was part of Dementia UK at that time. That then disbanded and became the Carers Call to Action. That ran for 2 years, and then Tide Carers was born. So you can see I've been around a while. I'm from a generation that revered any kind of doctor and never questioned what they said. Not anymore. During my time as a carer, if I thought something was wrong, I said so and learned to fight my way through the system to get the best care I could for my husband. Tide was there with their training and peer support, encouraging me on, and it was free, which we always forget to say. Being a Tide carer is free. I think everyone needs peer support on this journey. When I first went to Uniting Carers, it was the first time I'd met anyone who understood what I was going through or even talking about. I wish I'd learned much earlier that looking after myself was important. As Tide say, you can't pour from an empty cup. My advice to anyone starting out from diagnosis would be research, then accept all the help you can get. And more importantly, as a carer, remember to take care of you. If you don't, who will look after your loved one? Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Janice. That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Sharon?
Yes. I would say my partner was around 58 when I first noticed that there was something wrong with him. He went to the supermarket and couldn't find his way round, and he said things looked unfamiliar. So he completely lost his sense of direction also when driving. He mislaid items frequently indoors. He lost the ability to do mental arithmetic, couldn't read properly, write or spell, and he'd always been excellent at those things before. So I went to the GP. I was very concerned, and a CT scan was arranged. We were told it was apparently okay, and just to keep an eye on him. Well, a few months later, things got worse when his mum died. So again, it was put down to possibly stress or bereavement, but I knew it was something more than that. Finally, a GP referred him to the memory assessment service, and I asked if he could have an MRI due to his age. We waited about 6 months for this. The MRI showed microbleeds in his brain, and it was suspected that he had a diagnosis of cerebral amyloid angiopathy. So we were then told that we would have to be referred to neurology. We waited a further 3 weeks for that, and that confirmed the diagnosis. We sought a second opinion also in London in October 2019, which again confirmed this diagnosis. So my partner lost his job and his driving license. His job was actually dependent on driving, and so was advised also no alcohol. He had a further admission to London in March 2020 for an EEG and a lumbar puncture, because he does experience a lot of seizure activity in his brain. And 3 weeks later, we had the results that he had also Alzheimer's disease and partial complex seizures. So the diagnosis path from time I suspected something was wrong took 2 years.
Right, okay, thanks for that. Another, yeah, again, another example of diagnosis taking a while. Thanks for sharing that, Sharon. Christine, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your experience?
Some similarities with both Sharon and Janice. I first noticed Trevor was having problems when he was 50. These were put down to just losing his mother. It's grief. He might need antidepressants to cope with it, but the issues got worse. I then noticed the house could be a tip, but his garage was immaculate. And I went out to get something in the garage and there were just tools everywhere. And I said to him, "What's going on in the garage?" And he said, "I don't know where anything goes anymore." And the two of us sorted the garage. The GP, went with him to the GP. The GP said it was workplace stress. And I will admit Trevor was under a lot of stress at work, but predominantly because he kept arriving at the wrong meeting or taking the wrong notes or being there at the wrong time. This got progressively worse, and I then realised he was being performance managed at work, although they hadn't made that clear to Trevor. So I persuaded him to take early retirement at 55, because rather than end by being sacked, disciplined out of his job, I decided it was better. So he took early retirement at 55. I and my sons all thought he had dementia. GP was still saying it was workplace stress. I went along a year after he'd retired and he was living the life of Riley, he really was. And I said, we were still listed some of the issues, and he just sort of trotted out workplace stress. I said, he's not been at work for a year. What's your next answer? And they then agreed to carry on further tests. And again, because of his age, they test for absolutely everything else first. And it took 2 years from that point to then get the SPECT scan and get the diagnosis of young onset dementia. That meeting, when we were told he had young onset dementia, feedback was he has young onset dementia. Average life expectancy is this. You can expect the last 2 years to be in a home or institution of some sort. Have you got any questions? And no further help as to the type of young onset dementia. At that time, I didn't realise there were different sorts. And then, as Janice said, you get on and you do research. And I eventually found out about the Rare Dementias Unit in London, and by now my GP had changed, and he was very supportive, and he supported a referral, and Trevor got diagnosed with posterior cortical atrophy, which is the back of the brain. So he was losing his eyesight and his spatial awareness. So from the first signs, 8 years to diagnosis, the actual getting the GP and the medical system to take it seriously, I would say probably 5. And for a while, it impacted on our relationship, because it felt like if things were important to him, he remembered them, and if they were important to me, he didn't. And it felt vindictive for a while, you know. And looking back, I'm really sad about those arguments that, if I'd have known, we would never have had.
I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing, though, isn't it, Christine? You can only, you can only do what you can do with the information you've got at any one time. But, I mean, that is one of the things we do try and say, isn't it? Try and be kind to yourself, because we all look back and think, if only I'd done this, if I'd known that, But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you all of you for sharing that. So, I mean, it does seem a common theme, this the length of time it takes for diagnosis. Also a common theme that so many people seem to be the default position of a lot of GPs seems to be stress, anxiety, depression, and it's almost like you have to go through that and prove yourselves that it's not that before you then are able to to move on a stage. So the next kind of question I wanted to put out there then, and any of you can chip in first, it's entirely up to you, but what do you think you've struggled most with? What have been some of the greatest challenges as a carer that you've had to overcome?
Shall I start?
Yeah, that's great, Sharon, thank you.
For my partner, it was the loss of his driving license and his job. He's never really come to terms with that, I have to say, and struggling to make the medical profession believe my concerns. I was working as a community nurse, and I had to make the decision to leave my job. I think the loss of an equal partner and the loss of a normal relationship, and having to become a carer, lack of family support for us, lack of understanding from others. People say he looks so well. So I've found I've experienced a lot of loneliness and isolation, fear of the future, how long can I manage, loss of some friends, struggling to get personal independence benefit payment, that took some time, and struggling with his personality changes as well. So yeah, I would say.
So that loss of, just touching on that loss of or lack of family support, Sharon, is that, do you feel that's because people feel like they're too busy and they can't offer that support? Is it a lack of understanding, do you think, on their part? Is it fear? What do you think causes that lack of family support?
I think there is a lack of understanding. It didn't help that my partner's sister around the same time was diagnosed with motor neurone disease. She was 2 years younger than my partner, and her disease did progress quite rapidly, and she died at Christmas in 2020. So I think the focus was very much on her, with what was happening with her disease, and I think that people didn't realise that David was also having a disease process going on. Not the same, of course, but obviously still we are going towards a similar outcome. So yes, I think really there is a bit of ignorance there, probably, as to what was happening, and fear, and there may be some fear. He has another sister we never see, but he has a brother who is local, who we see very little of, and I do wonder if he actually worries that he might be, prone to getting this as well. I don't know.
Have things improved any over time, or do people just do you think that people view it as like, well, you're managing, therefore it's okay and they can step back? Is that your kind of take on it?
Yeah, I think people do think I'm managing quite well, and obviously nursing skills are useful, so I do draw on them a lot. Yes, I think there is more understanding now because the disease is progressing and it is becoming more noticeable now. So yes, I think there might be a little more understanding going on now than there was.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Sharon. Christine or Janice, have you got any, the things that you found the most difficult, the greatest challenges that you found?
I agree with Sharon that one of the biggest things to hit Trevor was losing his driving licence. The original assessment he was sent for, as soon as he had to inform the DVLA he had Alzheimer's, was conducted very unfairly. But they allowed him a retest, and he went, he had driving lessons because he worried that over the years he'd driven, he'd lost, some of that being able to pass your test stuff. And the driving instructor went with him in the second test and pulled the examiner up on a few things where the examiner was actually in the wrong. So he kept his license. The next year, the DVLA just revoked it. No appeal, nothing. And he absolutely went into the pits, and that's the point that the GP had to put him on antidepressants. And it was about that time that I had to give up work to care for him, because he wasn't eating all day. He was getting up, sitting in an armchair and not moving all day, and really knocked him for six. I have had Trevor has virtually no family. He's an only child of an only surviving child, goodness knows. The rest of his family's of his mum's side is in the Isle of Man. And they've always been very supportive, but they're not local, so they can't pop over and help out. Our eldest son has been very supportive. I think our youngest son struggles a bit. But our eldest son is the more local. And locally, we live in a small rural community. Locally, they have been brilliant. They have been really supportive. I think the important thing there was, as soon as Trevor was diagnosed, he said, I've got to tell everybody, because he said, one day I won't recognise them when I walk down the street, and I want them to know why that is. I'm not just blanking them. So he went out of his way to tell everybody, told all the shopkeepers, he told absolutely everybody. And so they've been with us on the whole journey. And I think that was the best thing he did.
Yeah, that's Yeah, I mean, when you say that, Christine, that really, I mean, it might be difficult for some people, and obviously everybody's different. Some people don't want everybody to know, but actually, as you say, when we talk about dementia-friendly communities, you know, you don't live with dementia in isolation, do you? You live in a community, and for that community to be able to embrace you, it helps if there is some level of understanding. And I think most of you know Linda Barnes, who's part of our young focus group. She writes the blog about her husband Ken with young onset dementia, and she said that that people who didn't know them, you know, personally to start with, but were told to read her blog, then got an insight into what their life was like. And she said local people then started approaching them and saying, oh, you know, one of my neighbours said I should read your blog so that, you know, I could understand a bit more about life. And she said it's helped her enormously that people within the community all know that Ken has young onset, so that, you know, they kind of look out for him. They know what to expect. There's a lack of embarrassment, you know, you're not having to explain yourself all the time. And yeah, it might not be for everybody, but I think that's really heartwarming to hear that, you know, people have kind of embraced him. Does he still feel confident then going out within the community?
Trevor doesn't now. Trevor is now virtually completely blind and almost immobile. So dementia has moved on a lot. He was independent for quite a long time. I remember one day he was sent out shopping, buy me some shampoo. I'd by that stage learned to only send him for one thing at a time. And he went out and I asked him where the shampoo was, and he said, what shampoo? And oh, okay. So I went down into the chemist the next day to buy some shampoo. And just as I was about to pay for it, this voice from the back from the pharmacy said, you're not buying shampoo, are you, Christine? And I said, yeah. No, Trevor bought this the other day. Look, he left it behind, and here's his visa slip as well, she said. And they just kept it because they knew I would be in, and just hand it over. And nothing was said to Trevor. They didn't make any, you know, pretense. But so he stayed shopping for absolutely ages. And as it happened, developed a habit of leaving his shopping behind. And they just got on with it. And this week I brought him out to a feast day, midsummer feast day in Uppingham. And we met lots of old friends and neighbours and people. Because they're aware he's lost his sight, they all bend down and they squeeze his arm so he knows they're there. And one of them explained, said her name, then said how she knew him, so he could put her into context. Which was absolutely lovely. And absolutely everybody we knew in the town came to speak to him. He was completely exhausted after an hour, absolutely completely. But I think that is because they've been on the journey with us. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a fantastic community, Christine. It really does. That's lovely. Thank you for that. Janice, is there anything you wanted to share? You don't have to, but is there anything you wanted to share at all about your journey with Richard?
My journey has finished. I lost Richard 7 years ago, so the things I struggled with will be different to those who are still caring. I struggled mostly when Richard lost his driving licence. Fortunately, I can drive, so most of the places that he wanted to go, I could take him weekends and evenings, but during the day was a little more difficult. But my brother drove, so I enrolled him in a reminiscence course, and my brother took him to that, and they thoroughly enjoyed that. He also took him to a country park and what have you. The second thing I really, really missed was the loss of the relationship with him, because he became somebody else, and that was very difficult to get used to. I know it was the illness, but it still makes the loss very hard to bear. The third thing was the tiredness. I have never been so tired in all my life, with working full time through the whole thing as well. Even when he went into care, for the first 18 months I was working, and that was very difficult because all I did was work and visit. I didn't do anything else. At the weekend, I got the shopping in the morning, went visiting for the rest of the day, and on a Sunday did the housework in the morning and then went visiting for the rest of the day. So there was no real break from it at all. So I did lose my sense of who I was, and the loss of my privacy, because when he began shadowing me, I couldn't even go to the loo without him banging on the door saying, "Are you in there?" Because he got really worried if I wasn't absolutely in front of him. So that was very difficult to deal with. Like the others said, the stigma is the hardest of all to deal with. I went to a carers evening at the local memory centre, and I'd been told I could take Richard with me, and Richard got a little bit agitated. He wasn't anything really to worry about, but one of the other carers said, "You shouldn't have brought him. This is for carers, not for you." So we got up and left and never went back. It made us feel so uncomfortable. It really wasn't very nice at all. But there is a lot of stigma. My son found it very difficult to deal with the fact that his dad had early onset Alzheimer's, and he found it very difficult to visit because every time he looked at his dad, he just burst into tears, and he felt it was making him less of a person by not being able to cope with it. So that was very difficult. The total lack of understanding of some people. I've frequently been asked by consultants to educate them on what early onset Alzheimer's is like. I wasn't there to educate them. I was there to get help from Richard. So I did educate them, but it baffles me why that should be necessary in this day and age. Some of the good things was the honesty of others. Richard smoked at the beginning, and he kept asking me for a £10 note every morning, and I couldn't understand why, because I think cigarettes were about £6 a packet at the time. So after 2 or 3 days, he would have had enough for another packet, but he still kept asking me for the £10, and I was baffled by it. But then I realised he couldn't calculate money, but if he handed over a £10 note, they gave him back change, and he wasn't responsible for what happened then. It was their fault for fiddling him if something went wrong. So that was quite funny. Also, the unexpected acts of kindness from others. I came back from hospital when he was in hospital at one point, and I was absolutely exhausted, extremely tearful, and I was really at the end of my tether. And my next door neighbour knocked on the door, and she cooked a full Thai meal for me. And it's making me upset now thinking about it. But those unexpected acts of kindness floor you. They really do. They're so wonderful. I don't think anybody has any idea what she did for me that night. So that was really wonderful.
Oh, that's lovely, Janice. As you say, there's always, there are always bright spots, aren't there? Even in the darkness, like you say, something like that just makes all that difference. And the fact that you can still remember now that, it was a Thai meal that she made for you, I think that's lovely. So you've all had, obviously, as you say, your journey has finished now. Janice, Christine and Sharon are still going through theirs, but although everybody's is different, there are similarities, aren't there? The kind of we often talk about, I was a carer of my nana with dementia. She didn't have a young onset dementia, but she had dementia, and it was 7 years I spent caring for her. And I think the thing that we all as carers kind of talk about is, as you said, the absolute exhaustion of doing it, the fact that you never switch off 24/7. You know, you're on call, aren't you? Even if you're asleep, you've got one ear open, you're on call, you're alert, you're awake, and that in itself is exhausting, isn't it? That the emotional side of it, not just the physical act of caring, but the emotional aspect of it. And I think as well, when somebody has dementia, the idea that you're not quite sure what's going to happen today, what's coming next, what they might do. Is that being prepared for the unexpected. So the last kind of area I'd like us to just have a chat about is, you know, the idea that it can be exhausting and lonely. You know, there's no doubt about it, it can be a very lonely place to be. So how has being a member of Tide, having that peer-to-peer support, how has that helped you? Or in fact, any other organisations that you get that carer peer-to-peer support from? You know, how has that made a difference to you in your caring role? And again, anybody can jump in here.
I'll start. I was quite late discovering Tide in my journey, and I think the biggest difference it made to me, I'd never been able to attend any of the carer meetings that are put on locally, because it had to be me on my own without Trevor, and there are a time when I'm busy caring, and I only got 6 hours a week carer support. I wasn't going to spend 2 hours of that to go and have a cup of tea when they weren't even young onset. These people were years older than me. Their relationship with dementia was very different. And it was actually during the lockdown that I discovered Tide, and very early in the lockdown. The difference it's made to me, being able to share with other young onset carers, it leaves you not feeling quite so unique. You go through otherwise feeling like you're the only person in the world with these problems. Being able to laugh about some of the problems with them, things like you go to the loo when they go to the loo, because they're occupied. So you've actually got, but don't want too big a wee, because you've got to be finished and back out before they have. Yeah, I had to have a shower when he had a bath. Didn't matter whether I was clean or dirty. I had to have my shower then because he was occupied. And laughing with other carers about this concept where you're in theory an independent adult and yet you're totally dependent, you know, on this person. The other one, which Janice was saying about privacy, the one I really struggled with was having carers in the house, because my home wasn't my home anymore. In a way, I had these people coming in my home, and I found I really struggled with that. Oh my goodness, did I struggle. And to discover I wasn't alone was really good. And other people who have listened to all seen all the lovely documents and heard all the lovely videos about take care of yourself, do this, do that, do the other. And they say, when am I going to have time?
Yeah,
you know, we're limited. So the things we did to recharge my batteries, we always had to do together. So I did park run. Trevor was blind, he ran along and I guided him. Fortunately, he's quicker than me, so he dragged me along quite a few times. Then when he was in a wheelchair, we ran it with the wheelchair, but we had to do a lot of stuff together. And I think sharing some of that as well with other carers helps some of them to think about what they might be able to do. So you can't necessarily take time to yourself, but you can have your time whilst you're with the person and not actually actively caring.
yeah, Yeah, that's fantastic, Christine. Thank you for that. Janice or Sharon?
Yeah, shall I go?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we didn't get any support from dementia services, as the CAA part of his diagnosis, which obviously came a year before, apparently didn't come under dementia services criteria. So I found support initially through the Stroke Association, because he'd had bleeding in his brain, and subsequently found Headway West Sussex. And they did support us for about 6 months or so, I think. We had really good support from them, although he was the only person that had a CAA diagnosis. Obviously, most people had acquired brain injury. And then I did actually put a letter of complaint into Sussex Partnership House regarding the lack of support from the dementia services, and they did actually address that, because we were just given a diagnosis and basically sent away with nothing, no signposting at all. When he got the Alzheimer's part of his diagnosis a year later, that did help. We just were we were in lockdown actually by the time the diagnosis came through. We'd gone into the first lockdown. So we did get some support from Alzheimer's Society, and I was able to join some Alzheimer's young onset groups on Zoom with David, although you know, he couldn't really manage that by himself, although really the group was for him. So I found Tide Young Onset Carers group last year, I think, and that was through a newsletter, I think it was from a carer support newsletter, and then I thought, well, that looks interesting, so I logged onto that and thought, yeah, I'll join that. I hadn't realised that they're mainly based up in the north of the country at the time. I think I'm probably the furthest south actually, but I found that's been a great support to me, particularly over the time when we were locked down and when we were, you know, experiencing such isolation. Just to be able to talk with other people who were going through similar situations, and in fact, a lot of them going through situations that were far worse than mine. In Worthing now, we have a new dementia hub which opened in September last year. That is for all ages of dementia, although we do have younger people there. We have a young onset group that meets there, and we actually have, as far as we know, 3 people who've recently been diagnosed with PCA. So obviously that is quite unusual. So we're going to set up a rare onset and young onset group, hopefully within the next month, I think. There's a local centre, very local to us, it's only about 5-10 minutes walk away, that he attends just once a week, just for an hour or so, just give it a little bit of a break. At the hub, he's using that he's done a cognitive stimulation course. It helps him to get together with other people who are having similar problems, really. I think but you know, he never really remembers what he's done afterwards, or when I explain he's going, why he's going, but he does actually enjoy it when he's there, so it is a benefit to him. For those 2 hours, I tend to meet up with 1 or 2 other carers. We live on the coast, so we may go for a walk down on the seafront, or we go for a coffee, and yeah, we can share experiences of what's been going on for us. He also plays table tennis once a week at the hub as well now. So I think that meeting other carers has been the thing that's really helped me to feel less alone, because people are going through similar experiences. And yes, I would say that there are many times when I've had things happen, and I know some of my carer friends have had things happen that at the time you think is the end of the world. And then when you relate that story, maybe a week later, you can laugh about it. You can find the humour in things. So yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. So those have been the positives, I would say. We really enjoyed Dementia Action Week in May, and we did a lot of activities here in Worthing. So yeah,
wow, that's
enjoyable. Yeah,
that's fantastic, and great that you've got that hub, Sharon, as well, and that you're setting up your own, little group now. That's fantastic. So yeah, thank you for that. Just a few more minutes then, because I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Janice, just to finish off quickly, how's being a member of Tide helped you? I know you came to it later, but you're doing an awful lot now, aren't you, in terms of raising awareness and helping to use your experiences, to change things.
As much as I came to Tide later, I was in almost at the beginning with Uniting Carers. So the fact that peer support makes me feel less isolated, and knowing there's somebody else out there who got me, that was the most important thing to me. I've learnt so much from Tide. I've made friends. I've been to Parliament 2 or 3 times. I've been to loads of conferences. I've thoroughly enjoyed all the training that I've had from Tide. I've hosted a conference, and I did at one point speak to 500 people at Congress, which was terrifying, but I'm still alive, so I made it through. And I think maybe if I could be very cheeky and just say, Christine, are you biker wise?
You're on mute, Christine. You're still on mute. Are you? Can you let me see if I can unmute you? Oh no, I can't.
Sorry, I lost my mouse.
That's
the mouse.
it's not
yes,
a Zoom
I
if
am,
you don't
Janice.
say that.
You are. I thought you were. And that just goes to show what Tide has done for me, because Tide introduced me to Twitter, and I met Christine through Twitter, but I've never seen her face before, so that was wonderful today.
Wow, what a small world. Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. Right, Catherine's back in the room now, as they say in all the best, hypnosis programs. And I think you've got a question or two, have you, Catherine?
Yes, I have. Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Catherine Kiley. I'm the Young Dementia Network Coordinator. I've been in the background, just keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A. So we've got a couple of questions here. So the first one from Annette says, I have an outreach service as part of our local dementia offer from the local authority that supports the person and their carer in their own home. What do we need to consider to make it easier for carers to accept support in their own homes?
That's a good question.
Good question,
yeah. Does anybody want to take that question? What do you think? I mean, Christine, you said that was something you found really, really difficult, wasn't it?
Yes, I found having a carer in really difficult, because they do things differently to how you do them. And some of that was cured over time. They got used to the way I did things. If I was having somebody new in a support role, I think the important thing is that they listen to you. They don't arrive wanting to do what they want to do. The carers that I got on best with were the ones who came in and said, what do I need to do? What are we doing today? And some people said, well, no, that's an extra burden for you. And I'm saying, but no, it's, I know where my husband is that day. I know what they can do. There was another carer who I didn't really get on with, who would just arrive, tell me to go off and do what I was doing. I'll look up, and she'd go off and do things, or she'd take him somewhere else in the house that I wouldn't normally take him into, and just would treat it like it was her house. And that made me really uncomfortable. I mean, silly things like we always drank coffee in the kitchen, because if there was a whoops, it mops up and you don't have to make a scene, because it was important to me you didn't make a scene. She took him up into a carpeted, softly furnished room and gave him black coffee. I'll leave the rest of the vision there for a moment, because you can guess how I found out there'd been coffee up there, you know, and that, yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Either Janice or Sharon, anything you'd like to add? What do you think helps, helps you accept support in, in your home? What would help you, somebody coming in for the first time?
For me, it would be I would need somebody who would take the time to get to know my person living with dementia. That would be extremely important to me, to know their likes and dislikes. Also, it sounds really hard, but after having gone through the dementia journey, I'd like carers coming into the house to remember who is paying their salary. In Christine's case, she was paying for the service that she was using, and they should have been doing what she wanted done. It's not a case of you just turn up and take over the house. It's you're moving into somebody's home, and it should always be treated and respected as their home. So yeah, I find that quite difficult. I'd never had, apart from my brother, and I'd known him all my life because he was older than me. So he's the only person that ever came in here to look after Richard, apart from one lady that I hired privately, because my brother took Richard during the day while I was working. All I wanted was 2 hours a week to myself, and the local authority refused to pay for that. So in the end, I found somebody privately and paid for that out of my own pocket. And she was lovely. I found her through an agency. I introduced her to Richard 3 times before they stayed together. And I can't tell you how many times I came home to them both roaring with laughter at something that they'd been talking about. And it was just so lovely. It was great company for him, and it allowed me to escape for 2 hours, which was wonderful.
Yeah, so trust and respect, I think, are two of the most, are kind of the key words there, aren't they? Yeah, thank you for that. I think you've got another
yes, we've got a couple more questions actually that have come in. So the next question is, what do you think would have helped you most when the dementia diagnosis was initially given in terms of support?
Well, I think I said really that, and I did actually address that with Sussex Partnership, that we didn't actually have any support from them at all, because the diagnosis didn't come under their criteria. So, and the fact that there was no signposting and I had to do it all myself. So I'm hoping that they are now, certainly in the local area, more aware of that, and different rarer dementias and young onset dementias. We don't actually have access to Admiral nurses in this area. So yes, I think I really feel that for us it's just been a big struggle, to be honest. I would have liked more signposting at the time, because obviously he's got a disease going on in his brain that is going to progress. It's and certainly has done so over the last few years. So yeah.
Thanks, Sharon. Janice, Christine, either of you?
For me, it was the Admiral nurse and peer support. So both of those, but they were the most helpful. The peer support that I've had through Tide and through the Admiral nurse were wonderful.
Right.
At diagnosis, I wish I'd had more guidance about the likely journey. Now, some of that they couldn't give because they didn't bother to go into the finer points of it. But I'd got experience of my mother-in-law and my mother going through dementia. I didn't realise how different Trevor's journey was going to be. And once I'd pulled him out of the depression that losing his driving license. We've done some amazing things. And I wish somebody had given us a vision at the start that it isn't all doom and gloom, that you can still do things. Special assistance on in airports, for example. We knew that existed. We thought we'd lost foreign holidays. You know, our last holiday in Tenerife was only in 2020. Nobody tells you about the good side. It was just, this is his life expectancy. Last 2 years will be in a home. And it was so negative. And I think we need to give people an idea of the journey. And I don't mean only the positive bits. I needed to know what I was preparing for along the way, the bits that were going to have to change, what you might need to research.
And as you say, some of this, if you'd been told at the time, some of the support that was available, some of the, you know, whether that be emotional support, whether that be, you know, financial support, having a benefits check, you know, those kind of things, council tax reductions, you know, all those kind of things. A lot of people come to us and say, nobody ever mentioned that we were entitled to this. And I had to find out for myself. It's kind of, you've got enough to cope with, haven't you, with the actual diagnosis, without then having to start doing all the research yourself. So I think probably more information, you know, at time of diagnosis, and then you could choose whether you access all that information there and then, or whether you wait till, you know, till it's appropriate, but at least you've got it, haven't you? You know.
Sarah, just one more question. I think this one's for you. Is Tide available for parents and carers of adults with learning disabilities?
Unfortunately not. Tide is only for carers and former carers of people with dementia. I think
actually they have said there is a high correlation of learning disabilities and young onset dementia. So if they had a learning disability and developed young dementia at a young age, then they would be able to
they would
Tide.
Definitely that's absolutely fine.
Okay, great, thank you. That's super. I think that's all of our questions. Thank you. And
I'm going to chip back. Yes, I'll chip in now to say that the generosity and kindness that you show in talking about your personal experiences and bringing it so much to life, the loneliness, the losses, the laughter, the whole mix of it, and Christine's words at the end where you talked about the need for something positive but realistic. It's just so important, isn't it? So important to, you can read as much as you like, but you've brought it to life today, and I honestly, I think it's so valuable, and thank you so much for doing that. And Sarah, thank you for your facilitation. Excellent. So much really to that you've brought out today. Thank you. I wanted to say that we will be sending the follow-up email with the recording of today and any sort of useful links that we can offer you as well. So that will be coming out in the next couple of days. And then also we're going to be taking a break from the tea time webinars for the next 2 or 3 months in order to be able to plan for the next set of webinars, which will start in October. So look out for information on those. We'll be sending that out in the Young Dementia Network news in the forthcoming months. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you so much to the panelists, and goodbye for now, and enjoy the summer.